Today we have Tim Fitzgerald from EDF to put this panel together. He leads the Environmental Defense Fund's global programs on seafood markets, supply chains, sustainable finance, and multilateral engagement. Tim is an internationally recognized expert on the intersection of ocean conservation and public health, and has been featured in Forbes, Time, Wall Street Journal, and the National Geographic, as well as New York Times and NPR. He serves on the advisory boards of EcoFish, which is a sustainable seafood distributor, Fairtrade USA, and the Sustainable Ocean Fund. He was a co-creator of Gulf Wild, which is the first of its kind as far as assuring seafood brands for us. And a long time ago, Tim will tell you, he earned his degrees in zoology and biology from the University of Hawaii and Duke University. He currently resides in D.C. with his wife, 2 daughters, and a pit bull who thinks she's a cat. So I can understand that. So I am very excited. I hope you are too, because we're going to start learning more about how we can be stewards of our earth and protecting our seas. So without further ado, here's Tim Fitzgerald.
Thanks, Gerard. Thanks, Gerard. Good morning, everybody. I didn't actually think anyone was going to get that far down in my bio when I wrote it. So you'll be shocked to hear that I think we have a really great panel and discussion lined up for you today on seafood sustainability, and we're really going to be diving into the 40% of animal protein that, as we heard over the course of the last 2 days, that we're supposed to be eating for a healthy diet for not only for ourselves but for the planet. So as you heard, my name is Tim Fitzgerald. I'm a marine biologist with Environmental Defense Fund. Our goal is to end overfishing in the 12 largest fishing nations in the world. I just want you to do me a favor. Raise your hand if you think about fish all day, every day. All right. I think we have 2 liars and 1 person who is actually telling the truth, but that's great to hear. Luckily, the people here on the stage with me this morning, which I'm going to introduce in just a second, that is what they do. And there's a lot going on in the seafood and hospitality industries that we're going to try and cover in a very short amount of time. This is actually going to be one of those great panels where you're going to be able to interact with the panel via Slido and ask questions. So if you have some burning questions now, you can do that, or also just throughout the course of the panel. We're going to cover a lot of topics. We're going to talk about wild fish, commercial fishermen, federal policy, chefs, hotels, sustainable sourcing, climate change, cellular aquaculture, and anything else that you can think of that we haven't already pre-baked into the panel. And luckily, thanks in part to CIA and conferences like Menus of Change, we don't really have to talk about why sustainability anymore. We're well past that, especially in seafood. So we want to focus much more on the how and the what. And that's where our panelists can really help us dig in. So without further ado, we have 3 wonderful folks up here on the stage who are really at the forefront of advocacy, taste, and innovation in the seafood industry. To my left, Lee Habiger is the Executive Director of Seafood Harvesters of America, where she works with forward-looking commercial fishing organizations from around the country to advance smart fisheries and maritime policy. Lee has also worked on Capitol Hill for Congresswoman Shelley Pingree, who many of you in the room may know as a sustainable food champion. Next to Lee is Lou Cooperhouse. He's the founder and CEO of Blue Nalu, a cellular aquaculture company focused on disrupting the global seafood industry. And Lou's done just about everything there is to do in the food industry, including stints at Campbell's, ConAgra, and most recently as the ED of the Rutgers Food Innovation Center. Last and certainly not least, Richard Garcia has sustainability running through his veins, his well-tattooed veins. His culinary career began in the Marine Corps, and since then he has been a leader in fine dining in Boston and is now the vice president of culinary for Crescent Hotels and Resorts, where he oversees 250 food and beverage outlets in more than 100 properties. So since we have so much to cover. Each of the panelists is just going to give a very quick kind of expanded introduction to themselves. Then we're just going to do moderated Q&A for about 20 or 25 minutes. And then we're going to turn it over to you. So you'll get more instructions on the screen about how to ask questions via the app or the website on Slido. So let's dive right in. Lee, you're up first.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks to CIA for putting this conference on, to my fellow panelists for being here, and for you all for making the trip out here and being here so early in the morning. I'm really hopeful that this conversation can spur some great dialogue and make you guys think outside the box about sustainable seafood, but also your role in sustainability of our marine resources. As Tim mentioned, Lee Habager, Executive Director of Seafood Harvesters of America. We're a national commercial fishing organization representing 17 different trade associations around the country, from Alaska down the West Coast, Gulf of Mexico, Eastern Seaboard up to the Cape, New Hampshire. We're based in Washington, D.C. I work on federal fisheries policy, so anything from 3 nautical miles out to 200 nautical miles. It's a very niche field, but a lot of exciting things happening. I hail from North Carolina, go Heels. Spent some time as a dive master down in the Turks and Caicos for a year. Went to grad school at the University of Rhode Island, and I've spent the past 5 years in D.C. working on all things salty and fishy. So.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks, Tim, also, and thank you, CIA. My name is Lou Cooperhouse, co-founder, president, CEO of Blue Nalu. Real excited to be here today with you as well to introduce this whole concept for those who aren't familiar of cellular aquaculture and how we feel we can really supplement the global supply chain and create basically a third leg on this stool, wild caught, farm raised, and our process of cellular aquaculture, actually manufacturing great tasting, high quality seafood products that don't contain any environmental contaminants and offer a number of benefits to consumers and to food service operators as well. My background is 35 years in the food industry. As Tim mentioned, initially Campbell Soup and then Nestle and Conagra, all doing startups, kind of pioneering a number of different technologies along the way, high pressure processing, sous vide processing, cook chill operations at a more national level, and also developing a first comprehensive line of gluten-free products back in the mid-90s. So just love technology, love food innovation, and excited to be with you all today.
And good morning, everyone. And again, thanks for being here, and thanks for having me, Tim. And for me, I would say that my great-grandfather would be super proud right now. So my great-grandfather in 1913 worked for the USDA, and he was responsible for the majority of the tropical fruits that you and I get to enjoy today. If you love avocados, I'm personally still waiting for my royalties, but he is. He was responsible for bringing those, and he currently still has an avocado out there called the Wilson Pompano avocado. The reason I tell you that is, food's really been in my world for over 100 years. My entire family has been, focused on food, whether it was, my grandfather with the USDA, whether it was my grandparents in Guatemala, running supermarkets, and then here in the U.S., I've really, food has just been it for me. I dropped out of high school in 9th grade. Didn't necessarily make the best decisions, but one thing that I did do consistently was I always worked in restaurants, and that was really the opportunity for me to kind of get the outlet, apparently, that I needed as a young kid, and had the great opportunity to go into the Marine Corps, and they took care of a lot of my younger challenges, but in return, I've really, been able to give back, and frankly, from a seafood, we'll get into that a little bit more here in the future, but, for me, it's really, really important that I'm someone that's in a position that, frankly, I shouldn't be in this position if you really take a look at it on paper. And I know anything can be done. And frankly, this is the type of summit and conference that we need to continue to have, because there is no doubt in my mind that we'll get to the goal that we're looking for, not only with sustainable seafood, but with everything we've talked about.
All right, who's pumped up after that? All right, so Lee, let's start with you. You represent commercial fishermen, the last hunter-gatherers of the ocean, and I think a lot of times they are kind of left out of a lot of the sustainability discussions. I think everyone assumes that we need all this extra fish, and wild fisheries are kind of maxed out, and aquaculture is the future. But I'm wondering if you can tell the audience a little bit more about the organizations you represent, the challenges that they're facing, and I think maybe most importantly, why they've why commercial fishermen have come together around this uniting theme of sustainability.
Sure. So as I mentioned, harvesters represent 17 different trade associations. So we represent catcher boats catching pollock out in the Bering Sea, trawlers going for whiting and groundfish on the West Coast, longline bandit gear in Gulf of Mexico, longline and trawl up the eastern seaboard and into New England. So a lot of different types of fishing gear, a lot of different types of fishermen, and I feel like most of my job is actually just herding cats most of the time. But the fishermen who belong to harvesters are committed to being stewards of our marine resources. Their businesses depend on healthy fisheries, healthy marine systems. They're committed to keeping those systems healthy out in the water, but also committed to the health and viability of the fishing communities on land. And really just making sure the industry stays viable into the future. As Tim mentioned, there are a lot of challenges facing just changing conditions in the ocean, other businesses coming in, aquaculture. Lou's going to talk a little bit about what the work he's doing, and so kind of working on how we fit into that space. So as you all know, commercial fishing has seen ups and downs. There's been huge booms and some pretty devastating crashes. And a lot of the guys that I work with have been through it all. And really before the strong conservation principles were put into place in the Magnuson-Stevens Act, which is our nation's overarching fisheries law that basically governs how much we can take out of the ocean, where we can fish, set up regional fishery management councils. All the stuff dealing with federal fisheries happens under what we call the MSA. So before the MSA came into place, our industry overcapitalized. We had too many big boats. We were catching too many fish. We didn't have many limits on what in the waters. And really in the wake of the regulations that were codified through the MSA, our industry had to make a lot of sacrifices. We had to sell boats. We saw a lot of processing capabilities leave our waterfront communities. A lot of our coastal communities shifted to focus on other industries. So we saw a dip really across the country in commercial fisheries. But fast forward 15, 20 years, and now we're seeing a lot of our fisheries rebuilt. A lot of our fisheries are even quotas are increasing, businesses are coming back. We've rebuilt more than 40 stocks since 2000, 44 to be exact, and 91% of our wild-caught fisheries are not experiencing overfishing. That's a solid A-. But that's pretty good from where we were back in the 80s and early 90s. And alongside those stocks that have been rebuilt, we're also watching our businesses come back and our coastal communities sort of rebuild. And that success is due in large part to the MSA, to the very regulations that a lot of these same guys complained and griped about back in the 90s and early 2000s. Strict annual catch limits, rebuilding timelines, all these things that, fishermen complained like, oh, they're going to kill our business, but they're actually now making sure our businesses are sustainable and viable. And so the Seafood Harvesters of America really formed as a result of conversations amongst commercial fishermen themselves and a collective recognition for the need for a national group to represent their interests. So there were a lot of sort of these piecemeal groups representing the catcher boats or the trawlers, but there was no sort of overarching group representing any commercial fishing interests in Washington, D.C. Nobody educating members of Congress, nobody really working to talk to the public and educate them, consumers, about the strides that our industry has taken to become a lot more sustainable. And as a lot of my members like to say, if you're not at the table, then you're on the menu. And so harvesters kind of came to be because a group of fishermen recognized that there wasn't a national voice for their industry. And without a voice in DC, it's hard to affect change in federal policy, and it's hard to protect these regulations that make our industry so sustainable. So we take seriously our role as stewards of these marine resources and also as suppliers of a great source of renewable protein. Our businesses depend on healthy fish stocks, and that means that we have to take responsibility for our behavior on the water, but also off the water. And we have to advocate for policies that support our businesses and manage our fisheries sustainable. So that's what we're committed to, and that's kind of why we exist and why we came to be.
That's great. Thanks, Lee. Lou, let's turn to you. So we heard a little bit about your background in the food industry. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the jump from the sorts of food sectors and food products you were working in to the one that you're really trying to make into a staple of the seafood industry.
Yeah, thanks. I guess one way to say it is, in my career, I've actually been very involved on the front line of food trends and innovations, and I've witnessed this huge activity over the past years in local foods, healthy foods, transparent labels, and really consumers that were very concerned about themselves and their families and really doing something different. And food has become increasingly much more experiential over time. And what I witnessed the last 10 years was a different kind of activity, really a shift from consumer behavior really towards foods that resonate around global issues, sustainability, ethics, trust, transparency, but really where foods could actually be a demonstration that you can make to your family and to your friends, and certainly to yourself, about making some small difference in the world. So in that context, I really witnessed this whole alternative protein movement. During my time at Rutgers University as executive director there, I also helped launch the U.S. birth of Impossible Foods, plant-based. It was actually the first initial production for the first couple of years came out of a factory under my watch in New Jersey, not California. And just really this whole activity in Impossible Foods, Beyond Meat, many others, quite interesting. And obviously they just had an IPO, Beyond Meat, enormous valuation. So clearly consumers are all over this category. But what I really saw, if you will, as a holy grail in this whole category is cell-based. It's really coming full circle back to the original animal, but no animal was harmed in the process. And in fact, you could supplement the global supply by, if you will, manufacturing seafood portions, not living fish, but seafood portions that would be made in a factory that looks a bit like a brewery. Large stainless steel tanks that kind of meet up with the food processing operation. So the food industry has many unique processes that come up with products that many of us don't think about too much, hot dogs, cheese, yogurt, many other things, and certainly beer. But actually manufacturing seafood is something that can be done. So we knew it could be done. The question is how we can do it cost effectively. And we were just encouraged by this whole triple bottom line approach where we can make it. As we look at the world, the demand for seafood is an all-time high. Asia is really leading the charge here. UN estimates 83% or so in net new growth in seafood consumption in the next 5 to 10 years will come out of Asia. So the demand is going to only continue to increase while our supply is increasingly vulnerable, decreasing, disappearing in some cases. So we needs a third leg on this global supply chain. Farm-raised, wild-caught, and can we actually help supplement that global supply with foods that we can create in these large food processing facilities? So that's really what drove us to this opportunity, and certainly the potential to create products that currently are mercury or an oxymoron, like mercury-free tuna. So it's really quite exciting about what we can develop and the flavors we can create, and much more of a demand-driven model rather than shipping seafood 3,000 to 5,000 miles from, for example, Thailand to New York City. We could actually have a facility perhaps in New Jersey or Pennsylvania or New York State here, where we could actually produce products that normally might come from Hawaii, but actually might be manufactured quite locally. So it's a total paradigm shift for sustainability and how we could have 100% yielded product that would be available based on the consumer preferences for nearby regions.
Yeah, I think, excuse me, there's some really fascinating things to tease apart there that I actually expect that we're probably going to get to in the audience questions around Asian demand and carbon impact and all those sorts of things, so hang tight. Rich, so you've you've got a fascinating culinary history, started in the armed forces, fine dining, food service. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about especially the transition from fine dining to food service, especially as it relates to sustainable seafood. What does buying that product mean, in your former capacity to where you are now?
Yeah, definitely. First and foremost, I think you guys kind of got the hint that, if someone tells me I can't, I'm going to tell you I can, and I'm going to figure out a way to do that. I think that, one of the things that's extremely important, and one of the things that really got me into seafood was, if you remember years ago, especially when, our red, green, yellow labels started coming out, in my opinion, I felt that, our East Coast fishermen were really taking a hit when those things first started to be a fisherman. I grew up in a seaside community in Massachusetts, and there were plenty of fishermen that were doing the right thing, following the regulations. And look, I'm not going to sit here and, no, I don't think anyone on this panel is going to tell you that the seafood industry is as ethical as it can be, right? So there were a lot of challenges, and personally, I really felt that they were taking a big hit. So for me, Monterey Bay and I had some years where we weren't necessarily on the same page because, I was asking the questions. I was asking the questions, why? And I think that was the biggest thing that nobody was asking, why? Tell me why I can't buy cod from New England. And they had, some really strong reasons. But then when we would challenge and say, well, what about these fishermen? Or, we have a mutual friend, Chris Brown, the guy's amazing. I mean, one of the most ethical guys you'll ever meet personally, not to mention from a professional perspective. Why am I going to punish him? Why should I, as a chef, punish this fisherman who's doing everything that he can? So that was really how I got into it and really started to build my reputation around seafood because I was really supporting these guys who the rest of the industry was being told not to. And I felt very comfortable when I was asked if I was using sustainable seafood. My answer was yes, despite that everything was on the red list. So to answer your question about the transition, I will tell you that we're still battling the same thing today, which to me, it's somewhat sad because there's been a lot of advocacy, and don't get me wrong, we've gotten to a great place. But I still think that we're in a position now, for me personally, that now I've got to scale up. So when I've got one restaurant, it's super easy for me to figure out what I need to do. And in fact, I still have my hands in a couple local restaurants where I live, and frankly, I think that in that perspective, I can really control what's coming in and out. But currently, I'm overseeing, over 100 hotels. I've got every brand under the book. I can literally walk into a Hampton Inn in the morning and be in a luxury property, charging upwards of $950 at night in the evening. Two very different, needs. So at the end of the day, for me right now, it's really trying to make sure that from an industry perspective, we're still focused on the big three. I mean, let's be honest, we're still talking about shrimp, tuna, salmon, and we're still talking about those three not necessarily being the best. So for me right now, it's really, and I've had this conversation these last 3 days, I will keep doing my work with ground fish and with fish that I know that I can get into my menus in regional locations. But I'm going to keep asking the questions about the big three. Why can't I get the right shrimp, right? Why can't I get the right salmon? And I think that, for me, is going to be the continued battle, is asking the questions. And I think that if more of us continue to ask that, the pressure will continue to build, and we will start to get the right answers.
That's great. Thanks, Rich. I want to stick with this sourcing topic, and Lee, going back to you from the fishermen you work with, who are essentially the beginning of the supply chain. What are some of the barriers that they're facing in getting what is a wild, domestic, or local, and increasingly sustainable product to the types of properties that Rich manages, or that the companies that are in the audience here today?
It's a great question, and actually very timely. I think the two biggest challenges that we're facing right now are market access for our product, and consumer preference and knowledge about seafood. So when stocks were at their lows back in the 90s, early 2000s, we reduced our fishing effort, and we lost a lot of shelf space for the fish that we were catching. And as we also lost that shelf space, we lost waterfront infrastructure, processing plants, ice houses, docks. That property got developed, turned into condos, mixed-use marinas, and that processing capability went overseas, or we just lost it. So a great example of this is the West Coast rockfish. So for so many years, consumers on the West Coast were like, told, do not eat rockfish, it's overfished, don't eat it. Stocks recovered way faster than we thought they were going to, and now it's a great sustainable fish. Fishermen are leaving fish in the water. They can't find markets for that fresh fish. It's a great fish. It tastes wonderful, but they cannot find buyers for it. They can't find processing plants that will take it and process it. We just don't have enough infrastructure to handle that increase in quota that we're now seeing for those stocks. Another example is haddock in New England. I was speaking with a company a couple weeks ago at Capitol Hill Oceans Week, and a representative was saying, we actually don't buy fresh haddock in New England because it's cheaper for us to buy imported frozen fillets, and then for us to take those frozen fillets and do our value add product for that. We talk a lot about the seafood trade deficit in DC. I don't know if that's trickled out into other areas, but it was just blowing my mind that we're importing frozen fish when we have fresh, sustainable seafood that's in our waters, and our fishermen are out there willing to catch it. Nobody's buying it. I know it's not maybe the most realistic thing to expect to change in the processing and waterfront infrastructure world. That is not where you guys stand, but you can affect it indirectly by using your purchasing power. And focusing on buying fish here in the U.S. I also very much appreciate it's a money game, and you guys are having to look at bottom lines, but processing is expensive, it's capital intensive, especially if you're looking at having to build out a plant. This guy that I talked to a couple weeks ago at Chow was talking about that and what the capital investment would look like to be able to actually buy fresh haddock from fishermen in New England. But I think it's a good thing to start thinking about, and I want to encourage you guys, as you're able, to take a close look at what you're buying, where you're sourcing it from, and how, if there are areas that you could shift to support local U.S. fishermen. I think there's a great story to be told here in our U.S. fisheries. They're really sustainable. Consumers will love that story. And you know what you're eating. There's no question about it. And it's the best of best. And so I want to quickly touch on the second challenge, this idea of consumer familiarity with seafood, their palate, their knowledge. And this is something where you guys can help a lot more directly by spending a few more minutes with your customers. Rich has done a great job up in New England with this, adding a few extra words on your menu, or having your wait staff kind of tell the story behind why you prepared a fish the way you did, or what that fish is. People come into a restaurant, they know what chicken is. If they see sea robin on the menu, they're gonna be like, what the heck is this weird fish bird? It's actually a great fish, and I've had it prepared wonderfully. But if I didn't have a marine biology background and knew what that fish was, I'd be like, I'm never ordering that. And so if you're able to have wait staff spend a little extra time and say, hey, this is a great fish. It was caught by Chris Brown this morning off Point Judith, super sustainable. Here's how we fixed it. Here's what you should expect to taste. And just kind of give that background and context. You're able to kind of maybe get your customer out of their comfort zone. And when you're able to get creative in your areas of expertise, it encourages the consumer to also maybe get a little creative on their plates at home. And we want consumers to have the opportunity to buy something more flavorful and exciting maybe than farmed tilapia. And when you guys are able to introduce new species to your menus or into the supply chain, and when you're buying U.S. caught seafood, you're helping to create that demand and signal to the markets that, yes, we want to support U.S. fishermen, we want sustainable seafood, and we want something that it is what we say it is. And at the end of the day, you'll be supporting local fishermen and fishing communities.
Thanks, Lee. And Rich, if fish bird isn't on your menus by the end of the month, I'm going to be pretty disappointed.
Best taco fish in the world.
It's great.
So Lou, to build on that, with this concept of continuing to rebuild fisheries, not just in the U.S., but in some of the other parts of the world that you mentioned, like Southeast Asia, for example, how can Blue Nalu, but more broadly, this kind of emerging sector actually, either support or complement that process, especially for, people who may not be buying those products for 10 or 15 or 20 years?
A great question. Our whole business model of Blue Nalu is to really work in total collaboration with the processors of seafood around the world have all this brand awareness and equity, and it's absolutely about totally our desire to work in synergy with that team who already has distribution infrastructure in place. As we look around the world, and we talked about it yesterday, I think roughly 70 to 100% of the seafood in any given country is typically imported. So our whole model too is to look at those species that typically are imported, look at those species that are overfished, look also where there's high seafood per capita consumption, high consumer awareness, high value, and also increasing concern for overfishing, but also environmental contaminants, where we can work in partnership and actually produce seafood that would supplement the supply gaps that might exist year-round. As I look at restaurant menus, typically the only item that might say MP on it, market price, is the fresh fish of the day. Because unlike land animals, where there's a great deal of awareness and one can predict supply and demand relatively well, in the world of the oceans and the seas, that's much more challenging and much more volatile. So we have a bit of a vulnerable global seafood supply, and God forbid there's effects of El Nino or acidification or warming oceans. We don't know about our future, so it's really critical that we do create this third leg on this global supply chain. So yes, our whole model is to work in synergy with the seafood sector and really bring to market those species that typically are imported, where we can create jobs, and even look at maybe former fishing communities like where you were raised, Richard, and really create jobs in those kind of economies that really understand the heritage of the seafood industry.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Lou. Rich, when we were getting ready for the panel, you said something that really stuck with me. You said that there's probably only 20 people in the world with the type of role that you have right now. And not only from your perspective, but across that, that group of practitioners and people who are trying to do the same thing that you're doing in the food service industry, what are they all struggling with right now?
It's funny because I'm actually here with the Avenger group, and a lot of us are in the hotel world, and we all struggle with it. And frankly, it's a small world, because when you start to get into the different brands, there's one guy running the Culinary for Marriott, right? There's one guy running Culinary for Hilton. So we all talk a lot, and we all struggle with, frankly, how do we source, again, what everybody is asking for? How do we source the salmon? How do we source the shrimp? And how do we source the tuna at the scale that we need to source it? Because frankly, right now, we have not done a good job of changing the American consumer's palate, right? So we're still battling that, and I think that, in my opinion, right now is still the challenge. And I will keep repeating that because we've been talking about it for so long. And I think we really need to understand, if it's a cost issue, how can we work with not only the seafood, the fishermen, but the entire industry on helping reduce that piece, right? Because at the end of the day, look, we're all very aware that our margins are getting smaller. Our labor is just climb every single day. We're just talking about labor. So what can we do, right? And I think that for me, trying to figure out how can we understand and figure out the support of the American fishermen, because guess what? We have tuna in the United States. We got plenty of shrimp in the United States, right? And from a salmon perspective, I think we have the best salmon in the world, frankly, coming from the United States. So why is 90% of our seafood being imported? And that really is, the biggest challenge for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think getting this question of the big three and how to get some of these fisheries and these species that especially a lot of Lee's members catch and could really build markets on into more of the mainstream is...
Yeah, and just real quick, I think the one thing to note is that we do talk about the big three a lot, but really need everyone in this room to understand that from a regional perspective, we've got so many options, and we need to really start, showcasing those options to our guests. I'm not asking you to take salmon off the menu tomorrow, but I am asking you to maybe try sea robin, right? Sea robin tacos, best tacos you'll ever have, in my opinion. Tautog, right? Tautog eat shellfish, right? So when you eat the tautog meat, right, it's the sweetest meat you're ever going to have, super tender. Now you put that with a dish that, whether it's with lobster, with crab or something, the marriage is so good that people are blown away sometimes by all this other seafood that's out there. So I guess I just want to leave you with, when you're in those regional locations, push the seafood that's there. Push the seafood that you can get locally. Run it as features. Talk about it. Supplement your big three with the regional favorites. And there's no doubt in my mind that if you guys do what you should be doing from a service perspective and your team is trained as salespeople, they're going to be able to push your local product a lot more than they're going to push the big product, because people are going to want to eat it.
Amen. So we're going to turn it over to the audience questions here in just a minute. So if you haven't gone on Slido already, either through the app or on the website, please do so. So while we're waiting for those questions to come in, Lee, I just wanted to, if we can, very briefly touch on climate. That's been a huge focus of the conference. It's something that your members are experiencing firsthand every day that they're out on the water. I'm wondering if you could tell maybe a short story about a fishery or a fisherman or something where that's really kind of coming to light.
Yeah, you guys have probably heard about the shifting stocks on the East Coast, especially black sea bass. Normally, or historically, the majority of the quota has been caught off North Carolina, Virginia, kind of that mid-Atlantic, New Jersey area. And now fishermen in the mid-Atlantic area are steaming up off the coast of Connecticut, Rhode Island, to catch these fish. And the quota has to be landed in the state where that fisherman is registered. So they're steaming up to catch the fish, the black sea bass, and then they're steaming all the way back down to land it in their home port, which is insane. And so we're grappling a lot in the DC policy world with how can we introduce some more flexibility into the management system to allow the fishermen in North Carolina to shift to a different species and move quota to fishermen up in New England. And then really quickly, another example is the Bering Sea ice shelf. Typically, the pollock fishery is based around where that sea ice shelf is. It forms in the winter, and there's some theory and some science behind why it's important to the pollock fishery, a lot around the zooplankton and phytoplankton concentrations, and pollock eat that. But that sea ice hasn't shown up in 2 years, and the catcher boats that I represent are having to steam further and further north to find these schools of pollock. And so we're just at the beginning of trying to understand what that means, but could have some pretty big implications for pollock, which is a source of seafood that is used very widely. It's what McDonald's filet-o-fish are all made out of. So, yeah, so a lot of changes are happening out there, and fishermen are on the forefront of seeing those changes.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting that those are two very immediate examples, but it is changing probably almost every single fishery that we know and that we source from. So you're going to be hearing a lot more about that in the coming months and years. So we're going to turn it over to the audience questions, and there's a good one that actually builds off of something that Rich, that you said, which was your approach to marketing lesser-known fish, which, correct me if I'm wrong, I imagine is probably a little bit easier to do in a coastal place like Boston or Tampa or something like that. How do you do that in St. Louis?
You get excited. I mean, that's the bottom line for me, right? You have to be excited, and if we're not excited and the teams aren't excited, they're not going to be excited about selling it. It's also about trial and error, right? one of the approaches that I really take is I'm in the kitchen with the chefs. I do wear a chef jacket all the time. I'm in the kitchens all the time. The chef jacket's dirty, and my wife said I couldn't bring it. I really cook, right? We're really in the kitchens. So at the end of the day, I think that from a marketing perspective, it really is about, being out there and talking to the guests. And I tell my chefs, and frankly, when I'm interviewing them, if you don't have dining room presence, unfortunately for us, it's just not going to be a fit. You really need to have dining room presence. You need to be out there. You need to be really selling what you believe in. Anytime we do a new feature with seafood, and I will tell you that at the majority of our properties, we do a market fish. Whether it's a mid-market property, whether it's a luxury property, we do a market fish. And again, whether you're in St. Louis or whether you're on the coast. But if we're in St. Louis, it really is much more about how are we going to educate our staff first and foremost, get them excited about it, and then they will do their job. We also take the approach of our servers aren't servers, right? They're salespeople, and we make sure that we give them the tools to sell. And frankly, the excitement is number one. So if you're going to try to do this, you have to be excited about it. You have to believe in it. And I really believe that that's number one. All the social media, all that, there are experts that we all use that can help us with that. But what they can't help us with is getting excited and really supporting it. And I think that if you do that, you will not have a problem moving that product.
Yeah, that's great, Rich. So the next one here, I think this is actually maybe a one that we can throw to both Lou and to Lee. So Lou, this question sort of asks, what have you learned from similar issues or controversies in the meat-grown space? Mm-hmm. And then the flip side of that is, Lee, are your members asking you about what Lou is doing? What are their thoughts about it? Do they think it's going to put them out of business? Do they want to give them a big hug? What's the dynamic like there? So Lou, let's start with you in the first part.
Sure. Yeah. This industry of alternative protein really did begin on the meat side, and so I think there's a really active movement in plant-based meats. Not just Beyond and Impossible, but also now Nestle, Unilever, Tyson, Purdue, and Maple Leaf and others are really entering this whole space, whether they're mixing plants with beef or they're going to an entire plant-based solution. So what has happened in some states in the U.S., actually a number of states, is that they've kind of lumped the plant-based and the cell-based kind of the same category. And one of the primary areas of focus is labeling, where many at the state level are questioning whether this product should be called meat. But there is clearly an argument, in my opinion, on the plant-based side because it follows the logic of almond milk. And almond milk has been under quite a bit of review itself because it's not milk, but it does have the attributes and the physical characteristics of milk, but it doesn't meet the nutritional definition. Nor does plant-based products either. But cell-based is, in fact, the real thing. It's actually coming back full circle again to that product that has the same sensory experiences and the same nutritional equivalents. And as I describe it, it's no different than a baby born outside the womb. It's a seafood product that was born outside of the body. So it's really just recognizing that this new technology will really help supplement our supply chain. So to answer your question, the seafood industry is it's certainly very different from plant-based, or certainly, cell-based is very different than plant-based, and seafood is very different than meat, because it's not as organized. There's not so much subsidies around the seafood industry as there are in the land animal industry. But nonetheless, our whole model is certainly to work in partnership with the seafood industry. Again, displace imports, create jobs. We need the seafood industry to be partners with us because they have the brand awareness, they have the expertise, they have the distribution, they know how to market these products. We see ourselves purely as supplementing that global seafood supply because the world does not have enough seafood to support us in the decades ahead. So we need this new solution.
And Lee, quickly, any?
Some of my members have asked about this. I think it is, in their mind, very far off, and a more immediate topic of discussion is aquaculture and how aquaculture and farmed species of fish will fit in with the wild capture. There's been a lot of discussion about creating a regulatory process for permitting for offshore finfish aquaculture in U.S. federal waters, and so that is more at the forefront of my guy's mind. I think there's also a recognition that wild-caught fisheries maybe aren't going to feed the world in perpetuity going forward. So how can we do aquaculture? How can we do these new forms of seafood in a way that complements wild harvest? How can we get labeling right and clear for the consumer so they know exactly they're getting a cell-based fillet, they're getting a farmed fillet, or they're getting wild-caught? Consumers want to know that, and we have an obligation to make it very clear for them. And I think as these labeling guidelines become clearer, these products are going to kind of market themselves and figure out where they all fall out. So,
Great. We are rapidly nearing the end of the session, so I want to give each of our panelists 30 seconds, parting word, final thought, dealer's choice. Rich, start us off.
You know what? Protect the endangered, bottom line, right? Utilize red, green, and yellow as a baseline tool, but know that there is plenty of seafood out there that we can be eating. That's the bottom line. Plenty of other choices. EatThisFish.com, right? That's a good opportunity to talk about that. But yeah, protect the endangered, but again, don't punish those in your region that are doing the right thing. Ask the questions, get out there, talk to your suppliers. If you can't have a conversation with your supplier about seafood transparency, they shouldn't be your seafood supplier.
Great. Lou?
Yeah, I think following some of the commentary of this conference about climate change, the world needs healthy oceans. We need living fish in the oceans. We need this ecosystem. It absorbs greenhouse gases. It creates the oxygen from phytoplankton that we breathe. 50 to 85% of our oxygen comes from the ocean. So by really creating a new form of seafood, we can really help maintain and preserve those oceans and the biodiversity that's so important, while also giving consumers another option.
Thanks, Lou. Lee?
buy U.S. seafood and eat more seafood. I think Lou has taken all of my closing remarks right out from my lips. But yeah, buy U.S., talk to your fishermen. I represent a lot of fishermen. If any of you guys want connections, come find me. We will, or Tim. Tim also knows a lot of fishermen. But buy local. Era talked a lot about seasonality yesterday, and I just want to touch on that really briefly. The oceans experience seasonality as well. And so as stocks shift and change and squid, Chris is out, my board president is out fishing squid off of Rhode Island. And so if you can connect with local fishermen, buy what they're seeing out on the water, and then market it and tell the story behind that fish, that's going to be a huge help to our industry. So buy U.S. and just eat more seafood. It's great.
And I will yield my time to the floor. I hope everyone will join me in giving a round of applause for our panelists.
Well, thank you, Tim, and the panelists for a very enlightening seafood session. Obviously, so many issues to go through there. Before we transition into our final general session on biodiversity, I wanted to just mention that earlier this month, Jose Andres and Eric Repair announced that June 25th, which would have been Anthony Bourdain's 63rd birthday, will be #Bourdain Day. Which is a day to toast and celebrate the incredible life and enormous contributions of CIA graduate Anthony Bourdain. Yesterday, Jose and Eric announced a fundraising campaign for the Anthony Bourdain Legacy Scholarship at the CIA, an endowed fund to support CIA students in pursuing study abroad and other international experiences while pursuing their education at the CIA. So we hope that you will participate in #Bourdain Day, and if you are so moved, to help support the fund. And if you are curious about want more information, you can go to ciachef.edu www.crop.org/Bourdain to learn more and see how you can support the fund. So thank you for that. Okay, so yesterday we had a very good overview of some of the biodiversity issues, and now we're going to look at the other piece of this, which is what can everybody in this room and what can consumers and food professionals and culinary professionals do about this. So we're calling the session Biodiversity, Why This Deserves Greater Attention from the Chef Community, and it's my pleasure to reintroduce Hans Dempelwolf from the Crop Trust, who you heard yesterday to lead this session. Hans.
Thank you, Greg, for welcoming me back to the stage. And I'd just like to say a few more words about biodiversity that I had alluded to already yesterday. And I just wanted to say up front that we at the Crop Trust are very excited about biodiversity in food systems. We feel it is a pervasive issue that really goes through all components of food systems. We just heard of fish birds. We heard earlier this week about interesting millets from India, from West Africa. All this is biodiversity in food systems, and it is biodiversity that we feel deserves a lot more greater attention. Biodiversity is also something that's intrinsically connected to sustainability and resilience of food systems. But how do we get consumers to care about that? That is something that we feel is really something the chef community can play a major role for. And so we are very excited to hear that there's a consideration to make biodiversity a bigger issue also at next year's Menus of Change conference. And we feel that there's really something we can kickstart together. I prepared a few slides just to show you some nice pictures of biodiversity in food systems. You saw that yesterday, different corn cobs. This extends to all crops. You name it, there's wonderfully looking, beautiful biodiversity out there. And it's not just beautiful to look at. These are different types of potatoes. It's also really useful. You've probably seen this image before, different colored carrots. And we, as I had mentioned yesterday, there is a real concern that we only use a very small fraction of that biodiversity for our food systems today. Right. We at the Crop Trust have started a few years ago this initiative to bring more attention to biodiversity and its relevance for food systems called Food Forever. It is framed in the frameworks of the SDG targets, the Sustainable Development Goals that some of you may have heard about. There's a specific target under goal number 2 that specifically talks about the importance of agrobiodiversity. And that target happens to be due not 2030 like all the other goals, it's due 2020. That is next year. So that's a tall order to conserve and maintain all of the world's biodiversity in food systems by next year. But there is a real urgency with this. And there's a problem with this, and this is what I had alluded to also just a moment ago, is we do care about wild biodiversity a great deal more than about food system biodiversity. How can we get people to care as much about cuddly, cute pandas as we get about millets? You know, the hand on the right is something that's much more difficult for people to relate to than that wild, cute diversity that's so successful made WWF's campaign for diversity. So we decided that the way to relate to consumers, that's our thinking, is in fact through food. We all get excited about food, and we all have a rich tradition and history of using different kinds of foods. And this is why we, in association with a number of partners, started the Food Forever experiences, which is a way where chefs can showcase the use of diversity in their meal preparations. Something that we kicked off last year together with the United Nations Day of Action on the Sustainable Development Goals. Eric Oberholzer is one of our biggest champions. You may know him. And we've assembled a group of chefs that have are excited about biodiversity and the use of that, and have them showcase in an event the different kinds of future foods that we may be eating a lot more of in the next 15, 20 years. This is just a few examples of that event in New York City that happened last September, and some of the ingredients that were highlighted at that event. We are replicating. We also got great media coverage. Actually, there was CBS did a CBS Morning News that covered it quite extensively, which we were very excited about. Got a lot of media pickup in different publications. And we've taken that as an encouragement to organize more of these events. This year, we've done already events like this in Costa Rica, in Germany, in Peru just last week, 2 weeks ago, Stockholm last week. There's one coming up in Chicago and in London later this year. We'll also hear a little more later on in this session from Paul Noonan about the 2020 for 2020 campaign that has similar goals. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention for this quick introduction. Our first speaker in the session now is Mike Lee. He's the founder of the Future Market, a futurist food lab that explores what our food systems could look like in the next 5 to 25 years through experiences and concept products. Mike is also a co-founder of Alpha Food Labs, a food innovation company that helps companies create strategies and products that are better for people, planet, and profit. Michael, please come up.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. How's everyone doing? Okay, next slide. Oh. Can you see it? Okay, so I'll start anyway. So my name is Mike Lee. I'm a food product developer from New York City. And we've studied the future of food for quite a long time, and we've tracked all of these kind of early stage technologies from lab-grown meat to indoor farming, you name it. And often when people say this idea of the future of food, your mind typically kind of goes to the high tech very, very quickly. And certainly that's going to be a big part of what's going to define the future of food. But as we kind of dug more and more into this, we've focused more heavily in the past couple of years about how something very kind of low tech is going to really also impact the future of food, and that is biodiversity. And we think biodiversity is sort of this linchpin of the future of sustainability because it's something that joins together the altruistic and the selfish. Here's why. Next slide. This is the killer stat. This is the killer stat that really underscores the importance of why biodiversity needs to be something that is more promoted on our menus and on our grocery store shelves, is that 75% of our food comes from just 12 plants and 5 animal species. We've literally put all of our crops in one basket. And even if you don't care about the sustainability impact or the food security impact of this statistic, why would you leave all of that flavor off of your table? We're too narrowly focused on just a small amount of ingredients to make up our menus and to make up our grocery shelves. So our sister company, Food Tech Connect, we also ran an editorial series and talked with over 40 executives, chefs, you name it, really smart people that had all different angles to talk about when it came to biodiversity. But we were left with really this question of, what does sustainability taste like? We all know what certain things taste like, and we have that visceral food memory, but sustainability is sort of this amorphous thing. Like, what does solving climate change actually taste like? So we wanted to explore this a little bit more. And in the Future Market, we've created, one of the things we've done is we've created a traveling exhibit that sort of imagines what the future grocery shelf might look like if we made it more biodiverse. Now, we've all walked on the cereal aisle, and while there's diversity in the brands and the marketing stories and the flavors and the formats that we see, they're all really made out of just the same 2 or 3 things. So we've traded off the biodiversity in the grocery store of our crops in exchange for diversity in marketing and stories and things like that. So, we looked at things of, what could you do with, something like fonio, super sustainable, awesome grain from West Africa, which you'll hear about in a second. And what if you turn that into something that looked a little bit like a Cheeto, right? Fonitos. What if you took, bananas? 95% of our banana exports are made out of one banana, the Cavendish banana. There's thousands of other cultivars of bananas. So how do you kind of maybe take some of these alternative bananas and put them into an ice cream kind of treat, and take a look at a way to create flavor out of something that's much more biodiverse? And then that led us to our newest project, which is called Viverito. And we wanted to do something about biodiversity, and we wanted to put something out there in the market that could give people something delicious, but also help scale more sustainable systems. Viverito is a snack platform. It's a series of deliciously simple snacks that try to connect sustainability to flavor. So this is important because we know that climate change and degrading soil health and water quality, these are all huge daunting issues that we have out there in the world to deal with. And increasingly we're all aware of how food kind of impacts those things, those problems. But there's a lot of logical solutions on how you can change alter climate change and alter water quality and soil health. But the thing about food is that food is the perfect confluence of logic and emotion. Despite all these logical solutions that we have out there, people buy food and they select food emotionally. A study was done in Europe and the United States, and it asked what drives people's food choices. And these top five factors in Europe and the United States probably feel pretty intuitively familiar. They're all related to flavor, taste, nutrition. These are, rightfully so, selfish pursuits of why we want to eat food. We choose food because it benefits us in the short term most of the time. If you look at search trends of just what people are interested into, you look at sustainability, climate change, plant-based diets, they're all kind of surfing there along the bottom. And these are the altruistic things that people are kind of interested in. Right above that is bacon. Bacon is purely selfish, right? It's delicious. And then you look at the ketogenic diet. So it's sort of also selfish as well, too. It's about me, and then the earth second, unfortunately. So, as much as we would love everyone to be able to kind of say, I want to take into account climate change at every single instance I eat, that would be a beautiful thing. I want to work with the reality in most cases, which is people are emotional eaters. People choose food emotionally. In fact, the professor who did this study, he said, when asked, consumers generally express concern about sustainability issues and would like to be informed about them. However, in the context of food and drink purchases, sustainability issues are not a priority. Here's how I know this is true. Has anyone ever had your favorite meal, the most delicious thing that you crave all the time, and then after you've eaten it, you've sat back in your chair and you said, oh my God, that was so sustainable? This is the problem. How do we scale up sustainable issues? Sure, with the data, with the logic, with the story, all of that stuff, but how do we get people to scale up sustainable food and sustainable issues on the backs of selfish pursuits, like better flavor, better nutrition? Well, the blueprint has sort of been there for a while, right? This purest idea of farm to table is not a new idea at all. And in its purest form, it's really this idea of a chef going to the farm and having a conversation and saying, what's good? What's good? What are you growing that's taking care of your soil? What's really flavorful right now? You give me that kind of mystery basket of stuff, and I'll go back into the kitchen and work hard and figure out how to make something delicious out of that. So, and that's the farm and the farmer and the soil are sort of leading the recipe development. I work a lot in the CPG space, and it's completely different when you look at large companies that are doing prepackaged snacks and things like that. The way that conversation usually goes is, all right, we have an idea for a snack, almond milk or a cereal or something like that. And then let's go to every farmer we know and say, all I want is this one ingredient, because I have $1 billion worth of demand in grocery stores that I have to scale up. And even if it might have a sustainable halo in the early stages, like think about almond milk and stuff like that, when you scale something like the almond to billions and billions of dollars of demand, you've just created another monoculture. Is that any more sustainable than having a wheat monoculture or corn monoculture? So with Viverito, we took a different approach. We took more of that Alice Waters approach to prepackaged food, and we wanted to try to shift the system of how recipes are developed not just for menus, but for products you find in the grocery store. And we started with farmers. And we started with these guys up in Washington State and Idaho, Shepherd's Grain. They're a co-op of no-till farmers that do amazing grains and things like that. And we sort of confused them because we went to them first and we said, what do you want to sell me? And they're like, I don't understand. Which wheat do you need? And he's like, no. I need you to tell me, what do you need to plant to take care of your soil and keep biodiversity going on your farm? And they're like, okay, that's interesting. And they do a lot of different things to take care of their soil and take care of their land and things like that. One of which is a pretty common thing that pretty much every farmer in the world knows how to do, which is rotate crops. So instead of doing a monoculture where you're hitting the soil with the same crop every single year and then supporting that nutrition deficiency in the soil with things like fertilizer, you rotate different crops that work synergistically to keep that soil healthy. It's got a lot of benefits, and it looks like this. So farmers will usually take in a 3-year sequence. They'll do a winter wheat in year 1. In year 2, they might do spring wheat or a millet or a barley. And then year 3, they might say like, oh, the soil's really devoid of nitrogen, things like that. So they have 2 choices there. They could hit the ground with artificial nitrogen from fertilizers, or they could literally just plant garbanzo beans and peas, which fix nitrogen back into the soil. This is their blueprint for sustainable, healthy soils that are biodiverse. We look at that and we say, that looks like a pantry. That's a challenge. So how do you take that set of crops that we know synergistically work and help biodiversity and help good soils and say, how do we take that and then create a recipe out of that? So that's what we did. So we took 6 out of the 8 crops that they say we grow in a crop rotation, and we started off creating crackers. Crackers are sort of like the meatball of the grain world because you can put a lot of different things into them. Try making a loaf of bread out of millet. It's pretty hard, but a cracker works very functionally. Not only is it a $4 billion category where there hasn't been a lot of innovation into it, it's also very flexible with a wide range of crops. So this is one of our flavors, which uses a spring wheat, millet, and flax. And for the other 2 flavors, we included 6 of those 8 crops, right? So the idea is that if we grow this thing to be a $1 billion brand one day, heaven forbid, we're not scaling up a single ingredient and creating a monoculture. We want to scale up a system. It's about the system. It's not about the ingredient. So these different crops have different flavor profiles, which are all delicious, but they also have different superpowers for what they do for the soil. So this flavor has hard red winter wheat, but also has flax, which is really great at building up soil fertility. It promotes microbes in the root system. And anytime you plant something after flax, it just pops out of the ground. Really, really, really great. So we want to incentivize farmers to plant more of this stuff. This cracker slows climate change. It contains millet, which has a lot of nutritional properties, but also is really great at sequestering carbon from the air and into the soil. Again, I want to scale that up and reward farmers for being able to plant millet and sell it at a human grade level instead of having it be sold as bird feed or something like that. This cracker nourishes the soil. This is the nitrogen fixer. Garbanzo beans and yellow peas, not only delicious for a cracker, but really great at just naturally fertilizing the soil and keeping that healthy. The goal for us with this platform and many other ideas that we have in the hopper is to connect this idea for people that says better soil equals better snacks. I don't think people necessarily have that connection as strongly today. And what we want to do is we want to shift the way we talk about sustainable food. A lot of times people talk about their food as this. They say, this food is delicious, and by the way, it's also sustainable. We need to start thinking about how to move to a world where we can start to say to people, this food is delicious because it's sustainable. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Casey Gleason. He's Vice President of Food at Sweet Green, and in his role there, he leads a team of people who are responsible for choosing what goes on their core and seasonal menus, where and how they source their ingredients, and the ethos that they use to guide those decisions. Please help me welcome Casey.
Okay, great. Thank you. It's great to be here. I would say, yeah, it is really amazing to be here and to be a listener and a participant in all of the conversations over the last 2 days. I think if you believe that what we are doing here is important, and I think everyone here believes this is important, then the fact that we come together and share ideas, I think is an invaluable part of the solution. And I just like to say I got a lot of inspiration and learning from all of the discussions that we had here, and thanks for everyone that comes and contributes and takes part. I think if we're going to make some lasting change, we're going to have to all do it together. So I work for a company called Sweet Green. We serve a very plant-forward menu of salads and bowls. You can see these are some pictures of them. This statement over here on the left that says the choices we make about what we eat, where it comes from, and how it's prepared have direct and powerful consequences on the health of individuals, communities, and the environment is kind of the statement we start with when we talk about making menu decisions. I think as people who eat, which is basically everybody, you have to acknowledge that when you make choices about what you eat, that those choices have these consequences. But as a restaurant company or a person who is in the business of feeding other people, your consequences are magnified, and it is really important to sort of put yourself in that place when you're making a decision about what you want to sell, and understand that your decisions will have these powerful consequences on the health of individuals, communities, and the environment. I'm going to talk about two things. One of them is biodiversity and how I think about it, and the second one is to share some lessons about a seasonal salad that Sweet Green did in collaboration with Rose 7 and Dan Barber to bring the coconut squash to our customers. So biodiversity, first of all, I will say, and I really appreciated what Mike said, I will say biodiversity, I'm not a scientist at all. All of the science points to the fact that there is like an oncoming crisis around the depletion of biodiversity. There are really amazing books on it, the sixth extinction. There are, like, if you Google biodiversity, you'll get there's even this year a 550-page report from the UN about about why and what's going on, and it's 550-page, all facts, all evidence. This conference and the amazing people that are here and the scientists, I feel like we have sort of like James Bond superhero movie scientists that are on a big screen with European accents and really like telling us all the important things that we need to know in order to do something. But similar to what Mike said, I think consumers think with their instincts, and also people who are in the business of feeding people also think with their instincts as much as science. The science is super important, and you can really get into it, and there are a lot of resources. But really, for me, there is something else. There's something a little bit different about it, and that is like if you are in this business and you observe what is going on around you and you listen to your instincts, you will see that we have to do something different. We sort of struggle to act on the science, but those instincts are real. I think if you are a chef or something and you have a pantry or a market and there are only 12 food items in it, and your responsibility is to feed people, you're probably a little scared. And I don't mean like if you want to open a successful restaurant and you only have 12 ingredients, but if you want to feed people and you believe that is your thing, 12 ingredients, you are probably scared. If they tell you, listen, it's 12 today, but 2 years from now it's 10, you're probably thinking, I'm doomed, right? What we need, I think, instinctively is to connect to that. We need more diversity. We know that like diversity in general is a solution to complex problems. If you think about it, diversity is our resilience to a problem that we have not yet seen. If you think about all systems are sort of a balance between efficiency and diversity, and the last 100 years of our food system, you can see we have nailed efficiency. Depending on how you rate efficiency, we are really good at efficiency. We have traded flavor for efficiency. We have traded nutrients for efficiency. We have traded balance for efficiency. And it is where we are today, but I think that there is an instinct in all of us who make food to know that we need to trade some of that back. I was thinking, last thing I will say about that is, last week, I have a 13-year-old daughter who just passed 7th grade, and we were having dinner, and I told her I was coming here, and I said, do you know what biodiversity means? And she said, bio means life, and diversity means a wide range of things, which I thought was a pretty good answer for a 7th grader. And then I said, that's great. What do you think? Do you think we should have 10 foods that we're good at, or do you think we should have 50 or 200 foods? And she said, I know you're gonna mess some of them up, so I think you need more of them. And I was like, she hasn't read any of these reports, but her instinct, and I am serious, the instinct of my daughter and the instinct of all of these people who are passionate about feeding people, our instincts will tell us that we need to do something different. And if like coming to this conference and we want to walk out of here with a call to action, I think that instinct will help us a lot. So if the call to action is going to drive all of us in the next year or the next few years to commit to sort of push the envelope on promoting some different foods that will promote biodiversity, I'm going to share with you what Sweetgreen did and some of the valuable lessons that I think will help you if you go down this path. So in February of 2018, Nick Jamay, who is one of the founders of Sweetgreen, who's I guess friends with Dan Barber, knows him, we got on a call with Dan, and Nick was very passionate about doing a collaboration with him where we featured, he is known for working with breeders to create really delicious vegetables. So Nick was very passionate about, let's do a collaboration with him, let's pitch it to him, let's see if he likes the idea. We ended up talking to him and we said we wanted to do it, and he said, that's insane, tomorrow I'm launching a seed company, and clearly we are going to be looking for customers. So we got super excited about that. That was a very fortuitous phone call, I would say. And I think coming out of the phone, like within like a half an hour, 45 minutes phone call, somehow we had agreed to buy 100,000 seeds of a vegetable that we had never heard of prior to that thing, which was great. It's a little crazy, but it's great. Row 7 is a company that Dan Barber founded with Mike Mazurek, who is a breeder, and Matthew Goldflab, who is a seed producer. The founding purpose of Row 7 is to return flavor to the building blocks of vegetables. It's very fascinating the way that they think about it. Dan always says that the recipe begins with breeding the vegetable, which is amazing if you think about how complicated it is to make any recipe good, and then you think about how complicated it is to buy something that's good. Imagine breeding it. It's pretty nuts. But so anyway, we came out of that conversation. We bought seeds. We gave them to our growers. We talked to a bunch of growers. We ended up featuring 6 of best of our growers. I would say we probably pitched it to more, and they were like, "That's a crazy idea." But six people: Bourdain Farm in Massachusetts, a Penderson Farm in New York, Cedar Meadows in Pennsylvania, Nichols in Illinois, and River Dog and the Weiser Family Farm in California. And I don't want to, it's not fair to downplay, or I wouldn't want to downplay their role. They literally said, "Oh, you want us to dedicate land to grow a vegetable you've never seen, I've never seen, from a company that started 3 weeks ago? Okay, we'll go there." And to be honest, we worked with them and we said, let's make a contract that's fair. If this doesn't work, you shouldn't be the people that lose. We'll take it on. Anyway, so we did it. The squash came out of the ground. We met with Dan a couple of times to make the food, which is, I don't think anyone's arm would have to be twisted to do that. It's pretty awesome. And then we ended up growing 26 acres of coconut squash. We ended up selling 120,000 bowls, 70,000 squash fries, which was a cool idea. And then we actually sold 5,000 just little squash at our POS. Coconut squash is really cool. It's a mix between, I think, pumpkin and kombucha, but I could be wrong about that. But and it was bred really to have like this really strong texture, but also be sweet. It was really amazing. And so the lessons that I got. So anyway, we put a lot of press behind it. We got a lot of good stories. It was probably the most bizarre thing I've done in 20 years of working in this business, to decide to put something on a menu in 85 restaurants that I had never seen, and knowing that we wouldn't get to taste it until probably a week before it went out. But anyway, the important part of this story, I think, for everyone is the lessons that we learned. 2 big lessons, maybe 3. One, if we are going to combat biodiversity as a food, people that serve food, we're going to have to take some risks. That's how we got to efficiency, by sort of cutting out risks. We're going to have to take some risks. Part of the risk in using food that hasn't been scaled is that it hasn't been scaled. So you have to figure some things out around safety, around predictability, and around cost effectiveness. And I feel like the way to attack those things is to know about them going in and have plans for them. The most important lesson in this whole thing that I would say, if you're going to walk out of here and think that you want to push this forward, is find good partners. On a good day, everyone in here is an expert in one thing. You're going to need an expert in 10 different things. We will need experts in all of these things to push it forward. So really, you need to understand that you need to find good partners. Row 7 is an amazing partner if you want to try to work on vegetables that are being bred for flavor and for nutrients and stuff like that. You have to have a very proactive and partner-engaged supply chain. Clearly, when you are trying to source something that is hard, that is sort of more difficult, you need some people that are up for the more difficult challenge. You need to have the right growers and processors of food. And really what I'm saying by find good partners is find people that are really good at what they do and really want to take that risk and also are really inspired to go on the journey with you. Similarly, in your organization, you need to get everyone to want to do it. And most importantly, the biggest partner in everything that we talk about here are customers. It has been said a couple of times here. This is my second Menus of Change. I came to the first one. The first one, there was a lot more talk about how people were not ready for this and how are we going to get people to eat. They are more ready than us now. And as someone who operates a restaurant, it's important to remember that we don't spend our money. We spend customers' money. Customers, when they buy food from us, we take their money, and then later we pay our customers. We have a responsibility to really give customers the opportunity to affect the change that we are all talking about here, and it's our role to step up and be that connection. So thank you.
Thank you, Casey. Our last 2 speakers I'll introduce together because they'll present together. And that's Paul Noonan, which many of you will already know. He currently heads up the SDG2 Advocacy Hub and has worked with a large network of chefs to create the Chef's Manifesto. We at the Crop Trust know and love Paul very much through our work with him on the 2020 for 2020 campaign, and he'll be talking a little bit more about that. The second speaker is Pierre Chiam, which I hope I pronounced correctly. He's a chef, author, and social activist, best known for bringing West African cuisine to the global fine dining world. He has several restaurants. He's the executive chef of the award-winning restaurant Nok by Alara in Lagos in Nigeria, and also the signature chef of the 5-star Pullman Hotel in Dakar, Senegal. And as a side business, I guess, he's running Teranga, a fast casual food chain in New York City, and also has an import business for bringing in some of those tasty ingredients from West Africa into New York. So he's a jack of all trades. He also happens to have cooked for the King of Morocco, the French President Macron, and former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. So with that, I'd like to welcome our last 2 speakers for today. Thanks.
Thanks. Well, thank you. It's been amazing to be here, and what we're going to do is just a little bit of tag team. So I'm going to start off. What my role is to work on Sustainable Development Goal 2 within the global goals. And when we started this, we started looking at the fact that many of the conversations around policy that are going on at the government level are happening around science, around inputs, and sometimes they forget about the food. They forget about the customer, and we just heard a little bit about that, the people, the eater. And so we started to think about how do we start to increase our advocacy and think differently to achieve these sustainable development goals by bringing together a conversation around food. The sustainable development goals all have food throughout them. And if you don't know what they are, they're basically a blueprint of 17 goals that the world leaders across the whole world are working on. And these goals have indicators under them, but they're in a UN government level, and so obviously they can be a bit challenging to engage with. But food is one of the cross-cutting themes. It's involved in education, improving nutrition so people can learn, through to gender and land rights, all kinds of issues where food touches. So what we set out to do was to work in trying to create a narrative for chefs, a narrative where chefs could connect to this big UN system and talk about the work they're already doing, but to tie it into a much bigger conversation. And so the Chef's Manifesto was a project that we started it's only 1 year old. We launched a year ago in Stockholm at the EAT Forum. And so it's our first birthday kind of celebration week. So it's great to be here. But what happened was we tried to create a framework for chefs by chefs, where we took those 17 goals and all the indicators under them. We talked to chefs in 38 countries, and we asked them how they want to talk about sustainability. And what we came up with was these 8 areas. And these 8 areas are basically in chef's language around things they can do. And you'll see one of them is protection of biodiversity and improved animal welfare, which we're going to talk a bit more about. The chefs that we now have in the network are coming from 58 countries. There's over 360 and growing daily. And so we have this broad ecosystem of chefs talking to each other, from food design to fine dining. We're gathering them in different parts of the world. This year we've had probably about 12 to 15 different meetings in different locations where chefs have got together and talked using this common narrative about how they can contribute and drive forward change. As I mentioned, the Chef's Manifesto is not just 8 areas, it's actually an action plan. That within the action plan we came up with generic universal actions that chefs around the world can engage in. And these actions cover a range of areas that are interconnected. And while we see that each of these areas is critical, there's some areas which we're starting to double down on. And we're doubling down on, why? Because they help us deliver on other areas. And the protection of biodiversity and improved animal welfare is one of those areas where we see multiple wins. From the Eat Lancet report to other reports that are coming out from scientists, what we hear is that if you improve the diversity of diet, you see a benefit in nutrition, you see a benefit for the farmer, you see a benefit on so many different levels. And so what we're trying to do is say, okay, well, what does that look like? If we have, at the moment, 30,000 edible plants, and we're focused in on about 150, how do we encourage and grow that palette in a sustainable way? How do we bring new ingredients out and make that exciting and dynamic and make it sustainable? So also a business opportunity that can also be profitable, but that can help provide something. And so we partnered with the Food Forever initiative. And why did we do that? Because Food Forever is about trying to say, let's look at biodiversity, but let's raise awareness through getting people excited about different flavors and different food. And so it's really great to have partnered with them, and we're really accelerated that partnership. It's been like 3 months, and we've probably done events in 4 or 5 parts of the world and growing very quickly. But we started to say, how could we bring together chefs particularly on this? And so we set this goal of 2,020 chefs by 2020, because 2020 is when we, as a globe, agreed to protect our biodiversity. It's very ambitious, and for somebody working on Sustainable Development Goal 2, very scary. But this is not something that we have time to delay on. This is like super, super urgent. Every single day we are losing some of the diversity that may be part of the future for us to solve one of the problems that we don't even know about yet. And so we have to do this. So what's 2020 for 2020? It's basically 2,020 chefs across 100 or more countries putting diverse ingredients on, talking to consumers about it. Very simple. So different chefs are doing this in different parts. You've got Anahita, who you heard on the opening, looking at millets, for example, in India. And We've got Chef Connor, who's running 24 sites in Ireland and corporate catering, using very different ingredients, putting them out. Last couple of weeks ago, we did 2,000 meals, all with different diverse ingredients that are not traditionally used, putting them on the menu. Other chefs looking at raising them on their menu and educating people through social media and the like. We're then also working with tools like there's a great report that WWF and Knorr brought out called the Future 50 Foods. Lots of initiatives that companies are doing to start to say, how do we get these ingredients up to the next level and how do we make them accessible for chefs? So I'm going to hand over to one of the chefs that we've had a great honor of working with right from the beginning. He's been fundamental in the development of the Chef's Manifesto and promoting biodiversity. So hand it over to Chef Pierre.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for this beautiful introduction. Thank you, Steve. Well, I'm going to talk about this company that I've been co-founding called Yolele Foods. And Yolele Foods is actually an African food product company that works with cooperatives in West Africa, particularly in this region called the Sahel, that's in the south of the Sahara Desert, which is one of the driest region and the poorest economically speaking region of the world. And we started at Yolele Foods distributing these ancient grains, which is probably the oldest cultivated grain in Africa. It's been cultivated for 5,000 years, and it's called fonio. It's drought resistant. That's one of the reasons why we work on fonio, because it grows in poor soil, the poor soil of the Sahel. It combats desertification, like you can see. It's nicknamed the lazy farmer's crop because fonio is really a grain that farmers can rely on of the climate change troubles that they've been experimenting lately. When there's no rain, on the first rain to grow fonio, they throw the seeds. They don't even have to work the soil. They throw the seed and they can sit and wait 2 months, only 2 months, to expect the first harvest of fonio. That's how easy it is. That's why it's called the lazy farmer's crop. It's nutrient dense, and it creates economic opportunity in the rural West Africa, again, the poorest regions of the world, like I mentioned earlier. Fonio is the fact that we can build a market for this grain, for these farmers, for these small cooperatives. It really hits on 11 of the sustainable development goals that Paul was talking about just now, of 17 sustainable development goals. Fonio hits 11 of them. How are we doing it with Yolele Foods? We are starting with retails. At the moment, we're selling fonio grains across the United States at different retailers, including Whole Foods, Amazon, West Coast. In the West Coast, we also have distributors like Biverito and Baldor's in the East Coast here. And we're having new fonio SKUs coming up. And all of them, like this is our new design, like you can see. We have a pilaf mix that has fonio with moringa and kale, that's we call it fonio grains. We have fonio chips coming up by winter. And so this fonio that you see is dawa dawa. I talked about it in the session yesterday. It's a fermented locust bean that you see throughout West Africa. So it will be seasoning the fonio chips. We also have a yassa fonio chips coming up with lime and chili. And we also distribute it through food service. Lots of food services are picking up the fonio at the moment. Among them, we have the fast casual world, True Kitchen at the moment. Tender Greens is one of them. Another one, we have the fine dining restaurant. This picture is from Cafe Clover in New York City. And we have corporate and campus and corporate dinings as well. You know, Rutgers University, Yale University, NYU, the New School, all are picking up on fonio because it's a grain that's really easy to cook. It cooks in 5 minutes, actually, and it's also very versatile. You can create salads with your fonio. You can create, it replaces, again, any grains in your favorite recipes. You can take any grain and substitute it with fonio, and you have like a grain that's even more nutritious and very delicate and delicious. It looks like couscous. It's a tiny grain, so it's also, again, a grain that you can turn into pasta, turn into flour, turn into your bread. Really, the opportunities for using fonio are diverse and various. Why fonio? Again, this is a reason, another reason why you should use fonio. I already mentioned some of them. The flavor is because of its mild flavor, light and fluffy, a little nutty. That's why it's versatile. It cooks in 5 minutes. I mentioned it's gluten-free. High yield. You cook 1 cup of fonio and you have a yield of 4 to 5 cups. So it's really like very generous grain. Nutrient dense. I repeat myself here. And finally, to finish this talk, why we should get involved. This is, again, to bring Paul and the Chef's Manifesto. Sign up with the Chef Manifesto and champion delicious food. Follow Chef's Manifesto in his Instagram. You want to say something?
Yeah, and look, this is a network and a community. So if you have chefs in your network from whatever size company or food service, this is a chance for them to take a framework and action plan, connect to it. The 2020 for 2020, adding in a diverse ingredient is just super easy. So you can sign up online, you can get chefs to start photographing, just putting something to the menu. It's a chance for your chefs to be creative, to be connected to a global conversation, and also to be making a massive impact. And getting to play with grains like fonio, it's just great. You know, at breakfast this morning, it was just great to sort of see fonio being used. It was delicious, and it creates an opportunity for creativity that's good for the planet and also good for you. So we encourage you to jump on board, and thank you.
Thank you.
Well, very exciting final panel, and nice to end on a culinary note in terms of bringing all these possibilities to our customers. We still are, we've got another round of breakouts, and we've got a wonderful lunch coming up for us, but this is the last time that we'll be together as a whole group, and so we wanted to make a few closing remarks, Walter and I, and wanted to also make a few thank yous. So we're coming to a quick ride through the 7th annual Menus of Change Conference, and action-packed a few days, a lot of wonderful speakers, a lot to think about. I've had some wonderful conversations with many of you in terms of takeaways, which is always great to hear. First and foremost, I want to thank all of you for attending and participating vigorously in this forum. I think for those of you that have come back a second year and a third year, you know how valuable it is both to come and get re-energized with everything that's going on in this community, but also to be able to add back and tell your stories about what you're accomplishing, because I think we all get inspired and energized by hearing what's possible, as well as hearing what hasn't worked. Many of us, you have a great idea, you're absolutely convinced that your customers will go for this, and then it doesn't, and we have to readjust and find another way, but we find that way eventually. As we close today, reflecting back on the presentations and the discussions over the past couple of days, for those of you that might have been here from the first Menus of Change conference, which we held in Boston, I mean, a huge, as we heard the reference in the earlier panel, a huge change in years, and the amount of activity and the amount of dynamism in our industry and the amount of positive change that's already underway is very gratifying. And as was also mentioned, I don't hear very many people saying, well, I don't know if my customer is ready for this. I mean, yes, perhaps for this or that intervention, but generally the landscape of consumer demand is changing so rapidly, and it's more of a case of how can we catch up and continue to lead and support what our customers are asking us for. It's encouraging that there is a passion to reinvent the future, and also to do it in a way that keeps our industry economically strong and dynamic. The worst case is to, circle the wagons, avoid the news, and then wait until either government policy crashes in on us, or we're way behind where our customers are. And I'm really proud of so many people in our industry, so many people in this room that understand the future is changing, and change is not easy, but we have to aggressively pursue it. At the same time, as we heard, particularly in the early science presentations of the conference, we can't sit on our hands. There is tremendous urgency for accelerated action, and that's very, very clear. So you're all leaders in this room. You're doing a lot. You're pushing hard, but we all collectively need to redouble our efforts and to be smart about how to leverage what we're doing, how to scale our efforts, how to work more closely with other people, how to avoid needless competition when we can be working together and really accelerate progress on all of the urgent imperatives that we face. Finally, a few thank yous. Thank you to all the presenters who have come from near and far to join us for this. Thank you to the incredible companies who have stepped up to support this initiative. Again, many who have been with us for many, many years, which allows us to confidently plan and continue to push this initiative, which is, again, not just about this conference, it's about the annual report. It's about all the work that happens throughout the years and our ability to share what we learn through this process with all of our various collaboratives that have a deep reach into these different sectors to make change happen. So let's give a round of applause to all of those folks. I want to also thank Dr. Willett at Harvard and all of his team there. This is an amazing partnership that goes back to the mid-90s. Dr. Willett and myself, even before that, before I joined the CIA in 1995, and really appreciate his leadership and the support and vision of the entire department at Harvard Chan. And finally, a very big thank you to everybody that touches the world of operations here and knows what it takes to put on a big event. So I want to mention a very big thank you to Team CIA for all of their efforts to plan and stage this gathering, and a special shout out to our strategic initiatives team. I think you've met many of them throughout the conference. Many of them are still working behind the scenes. And a special shout out to our program leadership from Jackie Chi, who will be back up here in a minute. So thank you all so much. And with that, I'm going to turn the podium over to Dr. Willett for a few closing thoughts. Walter?
Thank you, Greg. Well, I want to reiterate Greg's comments about everyone here who came, took time out of your busy schedules, and shared your experiences with things you've created, the challenges you've met. This really is the world's leadership in terms of transforming the food industry right here in this room. So thank you again for coming. But I did want to especially thank Greg for his visionary leadership for really almost 30 years now in bringing together science, food operators, journalists, every aspect of the culinary world to take on some of these huge challenges that we're facing. So thank you, Greg, your whole team, Jackie, everyone else who made this conference possible. So we've seen a lot of creativity, innovation here in the last 2 days. It's inspirational. Some of this is coming from leaders that directly in the food service, some from institutions that are not directly related to the food service, like WeWorks. It's really impressive that they're committing themselves to the kinds of changes that we really need to see happening. We've also seen an enormous amount of creativity in new food products, new ways of presenting food at the table. Impossible Burger, of course, has been a lot of the buzz this year, and that's opened, I think, expanded the discussion, opened new opportunities. It's not the ultimate burger. It's not as healthy as it could be with really whole foods as the primary ingredients, but it's a beginning, and it's a challenge to go beyond impossible. Of course, everything we do, we experience some pushback, and there are many lawyers, as you're well aware, trying to make it impossible to use the word burger for anything that's not red meat. And I would note that we do have us in Boston. If we lose that struggle, we can't use burger. We do have a word in Boston that will do just well. It's called bugger, as in hamburger. So there are some alternatives there. A couple of years ago, I did use the analogy of being at a fork in the road, and that's really what the Eat Lancet report was about in some ways, of going down a path with increasing environmental degradation, poor health, and increasing social disruption, or the other path leading us to a healthy and sustainable future. But I've come to realize, working in this area for the last several years with earth scientists and others involved in areas outside of our direct food world, that the fork in the road is not the right analogy. We are on an expressway that is headed very quickly toward a cliff that will take us over that cliff to a situation of accelerating irreversible climate change that will make our planet not possible to live on for many, many parts of our world. And this is happening very, very quick. This is much more serious in terms of the timeline than we had thought. The other path is toward a healthy and sustainable future, but that's not the expressway that we're on, and we need to find an exit to this expressway. We need to find it fast. The sense of urgency is much more intense than I think most of us appreciated just a few years ago. Fortunately, there is an alternative. It will have to start with, at the core of it, with moving toward green energy as quickly as we can. And we have to find national leadership that will help us move, but that waiting for it can't let us delay in doing everything we can at our personal level, at our institutions, at our state and our cities. We really need to pull out all stops in doing this. So I'm greatly appreciative of the tremendous effort and investment in making change among the people who are attending this conference. As Greg said, we need to expand it as quickly as we can. Interestingly, of course, many of the things are beyond the direct control of national energy policy, beyond us as individuals. But there are lots of things that we've heard about in the last couple of days that can move us forward on many agendas. And as Greg said, I think the fact that we're not bending the main curves yet means we need to expand our tent, bring more people aboard, and redouble our energies. For just one example, the 30% blended burger, 30% mushrooms is a big step forward, but I learned in informal discussions we could go to 50 or maybe 60 and 80%. So maybe next year we can come back with 40% and ratchet it up 10% a year. I think everything we're doing, we need to look for opportunities to do it even better and more rapidly. Interestingly, despite all the statistics, it's easy to envision a future that is not doom and gloom, because the opportunities for a future that is healthy, sustainable, more equitable, better quality of life in every way it's easy to envision. It's just getting off the exit that we're on and going down a different path. So again, thank you everyone for coming. I look forward to being here the next year and the next year, and hopefully we can see even more progress toward the goal that I think we all share. Thank you.
Thank you, Walter. And with that, please welcome Jackie Chi back to the podium.
Thank you so much, Greg and Walter. We're here. Last general session, we finished. We've still got that round of great breakouts, as Greg mentioned, as well as lunch. So I've got closing notes for you all. Our walk-around sponsor exchange lunch is going to be taking place outside again at 12 o'clock in the Marriott Pavilion, where we had the reception yesterday. And for your breakouts, if you're not already friends with the back of your badge, you'll know that I am about to tell you. Look on the back of your badge to see what you're registered for. I've changed things up a bit. I don't have a map for you this time, so please listen carefully. Our breakout sessions are starting at 10:45 a.m. after the break, so you've got plenty of time to go down to the reception, to go down to the break and the networking break downstairs. At 10:45, if you're in breakout C1, you're going to be in the Danny K. Theater. If you're in breakout C2, you're going to be in the Anheuser-Busch Theater, which is in Roth Hall, just across from the plaza outside. If you're in C3, you're going to be in the Multipurpose Room West in the Student Commons. That's down by the Egg. And if you're in breakout C4, you're going to be in the Ecolab Theater in the Again, after you've enjoyed the break downstairs, if you just make your way outside in the general direction of where you think you're headed, we'll have people with gold badges showing you around to where you go. So with that, I invite you to enjoy the networking break. It's sponsored by Dea Foods and The Wonderful Company. And I should also note that during this break, there's going to be a book signing by Pierre Thiam, who we've just heard from, as well as Seamus Mullen. Anybody who was part of those breakout sessions, or even if you weren't part of those breakout sessions, please go check out their book signings. And I release you. Thank you so much.
This is a recipe for beet tartare with a quick-cured egg, a modern take on an old classic. Combine the fish sauce, Worcestershire sauce, oyster sauce, honey, hot sauce, garlic cloves, and ground mustard. Gently place the yolks in the marinade. Cover and marinate in the refrigerator for 12 to 24 hours. These beets have been roasted, peeled, and diced. Combine the beets with the mayonnaise, Tabasco sauce, cornichons, capers, and scallions, and toss gently to combine. Season to taste and hold refrigerated. Add a small amount of oil to a cast iron pan. Cut the peeled shallots in half and sear, flat side down, until they begin to caramelize. Set aside. To plate, use a round cutter to form the beet tartare. Place an egg yolk in the middle. Garnish with bruleed shallots, radishes, asparagus spears, dill tops, and microgreens. Finish with dots of Hellmann's Real Mayonnaise. Here's our beet tartare with quick-cured egg. Enjoy!
Here's a great way to put produce at the center of the plate in the middle of winter. Watermelon is available year-round, and because it's a member of the gourd family, it lends itself very well to pairing with other winter vegetables. In this recipe, I'm going to use the watermelon rind and pair it with some global flavors and some spice. This is a watermelon rind massaman curry with winter vegetables. To start the curry, heat the oil in a saucepan over moderate heat. Then add the garlic and the shallots and stir until it's fragrant. Add the curry paste and the chili paste or the chili flakes and stir it for about 10 seconds. Remove half a cup of the top of the creamy layer of the coconut milk and add that to the pan. Stir and cook until the paste is bubbly and the oil begins to separate. Add the remaining coconut milk, soy sauce, onions, and watermelon rind. Reduce the heat and simmer until the onions and the watermelon rind are soft. Add the remaining vegetables in the water and cook for another 4 to 5 minutes. Adjust the seasoning with fish sauce, sugar, and lime juice. Next, add the kaffir lime leaves and the basil and serve immediately over jasmine rice. This easy dish is full of warm Indian spices that will be sure to have you enjoying watermelon all year long.
This dish is a fun take on a classic gratiné, hollandaise crusted cauliflower, seasoned with cheese and mustards. Cut the cauliflower into florets, then toss the florets in a mixing bowl with oil, hot sauce, thyme, garlic, salt, and pepper. Place on a sheet pan lined with parchment paper and roast at a 425-degree oven until the florets begin to turn golden brown, about 15 to 20 minutes. Remove and set aside. Meanwhile, combine the panko, parsley, lemon zest, and cheeses, then season with the salt and pepper. Combine the Knorr liquid hollandaise sauce with the grainy and Dijon mustards. Place the roasted cauliflower in a preheated cast iron pan, top with the hollandaise sauce, and sprinkle with the breadcrumb mixture. Roast for another 10 minutes or until the breadcrumbs are golden brown. Here is the finished dish. Enjoy.
If you find yourself throwing away, please don't. I'm going to show you how to candy it. And this is a recipe that you can make throughout the year since watermelon is available year-round. I'm going to cut the watermelon rind by removing the green peel and all of the flesh from the inside. Then cut it into 3-inch by 1/4-inch pieces. I mix the salt with the water and I soak the rind overnight at room temperature. Drain the rind, rinse it well, and then cook it in fresh water until it's tender, which should take about 5 minutes. Drain it and set aside. Next, I'm going to put the vinegar and the spices and sugar into a pot and boil it for 5 minutes. I'll add the rind and then boil this until the rind is clear. I remove it from the heat and let it stand at room temperature until it's cool. After I drain the rind, I'm going to place it onto a sugar-coated pan and cover it with more sugar. Let this set out for a day at room temperature uncovered. The next day, shake off all the excess sugar and store it in an airtight container for up to 2 weeks. You can use the candied watermelon rind as a garnish for cocktails and drinks. You can dip it into chocolate for a sweet, sour, and salty snack, or you can use it as a garnish for cakes, tarts, cupcakes, and cookies.
This is a light, refreshing dish featuring sustainable seafood, Alaskan black cod with a grapefruit relish and an avocado cream. In a bowl, whisk together the grapefruit juice, soy sauce, mirin, miso paste, and black pepper. Marinate the cod fillets for up to 30 minutes. Relish, char the jalapeno over an open flame. Once cooled, seed and mince. Combine with the diced grapefruit segments, scallions, sugar, red wine vinegar, and olive oil. Season to taste and refrigerate until ready to use. To make the avocado cream, combine the avocado, garlic, yogurt, Hellmann's light mayonnaise, chili, and lime juice in a blender. Blend until smooth. Heat oil in a non-stick sauté pan over medium heat. Pan-sear the cod until opaque and beginning to caramelize. To serve, place the avocado avocado cream on the bottom of the plate. Top with the fish and the grapefruit relish. Garnish with microgreens. Here's our finished dish. I hope you enjoy.
Here's a recipe that's sure to impress your guests. I've used 2 types of watermelon in this recipe, both red and yellow. Yellow watermelon tends to red watermelon and creates a beautiful color contrast. I've also used watermelon juice dressing. You can make this recipe a day ahead. So let's make our watermelon and avocado mosaic with Dungeness crab salad. Place the watermelon into a blender and blend until smooth. Let this juice sit refrigerated for 1 to 2 hours until the solids have settled to the bottom. You want to decant the clear liquid from the top, leaving the solids behind. Next, you'll want to take the decanted watermelon juice, the gelatin, the lemon juice, and the salt, and bring this to a simmer until the gelatin is melted. You may want to skim as necessary. Next, we'll make the mosaic. Place a piece of plastic wrap at the bottom of a mold. You may use some spray or some water to hold the plastic in place. I'm going to alternate pieces of the red and yellow watermelon along with the avocado inside the mold, leaving a little bit of space in between each piece. Next, I'm going to pour the gelatin over the mold, making sure to barely cover the watermelon and the avocado. Place this into the refrigerator to chill and let it set for an hour. To make the crab salad, gently squeeze the crab meat to remove any excess moisture that might remain. Place the crab meat, the lemon zest, the mayonnaise, creme fraiche, and chives into a mixing bowl and gently toss this together until combined. To plate the salad, remove the mosaic from the refrigerator and then remove it from the mold and place it on your serving dish. If desired, heat a spoon or the edge of a knife and smooth the edges of the mosaic. To finish the dish, I'm going to place the crab salad on top of the mosaic and garnish with microgreens. I hope you'll find this watermelon and avocado mosaic with Dungeness crab salad visually appealing and fun to make.
Here is a dish with spiralized sweet potatoes, clams, and a creamy Asian turmeric sauce. Using a spiralizer, sterilize the sweet potatoes into long, thick noodles. Cook the sweet potatoes in boiling water, stirring gently for about a minute or 2. Drain and set aside. Heat the vegetable oil in a wok over medium-low heat. Add the sweet potato noodles. Stir frequently and cook just until tender. Remove from the wok and set aside. In the same wok, add a little oil, add the clams, turn the heat to medium, add the garlic, ginger, and chopped chili pepper. Add coconut milk and Knorr Professional liquid concentrate base. Add turmeric and fresh lime juice. Cook until the clams are open, remove, and then set aside. Reduce the broth until it's thick enough to coat a spoon, and season to taste. Add the noodles back into the sauce, toss gently, and then add the clams to combine well. Place the noodles and the clams on a plate, sprinkle with furikake, cilantro, and sprouts. Garnish with lime. So here is the finished dish. Enjoy.
If you find yourself with an excess of watermelon, turn it into juice. People are rediscovering fermented beverages these days. And here's a delicious recipe for making a watermelon shrub. Heat the sugar and vinegar on the stove instantly until the sugar is dissolved. Add the watermelon and simmer to release its juices and flavors into the syrup. Cool the mixture and strain out any solids. Add water to taste. Place the mixture into a glass jar and allow it to rest in the refrigerator for 4 days covered. This can be blended with alcohol or other flavors of your choosing to make a delicious beverage. So here's our watermelon shrub. I've garnished it with a watermelon wedge and candied watermelon rind.